there guys, today we're going to be studying council communism, in specific revolutionary council communism or Marxist council communism. The reason why I make that sort of distinction is because we have sort of anarchist council communism, so you've got a lot of people who will sort of use the label council communism. They'll say they're a council communist, but they take sort of the anarchist line for every single political point or discussion that they have. So this is actually, what Marxist council communism is. This is the essence of council communism. That's what we're going to be studying today, and we're going to be going over the basic theory of council communism. And this video is sort of designed for people who are complete beginners to Marxism, so it'll be sort of drawing out some of the key terms and words which may be difficult to understand to someone who is just starting to learn Marxism, but it might be interesting to you as well if you've already studied these concepts. So council communism is quite orthodox in its understanding of Marxism. So in the development of capitalism, it's said to be categorized by a reorganization of society, namely with a minority and smaller number of capitalist owners and a larger number and a majority of wage workers. And as capitalist development continues, as it sort of intensifies and gets to its higher stages, the small proprietors and restaurant owners and sort of more bourgeois peasants, so what we'd sort of refer to as the petty bourgeoisie class, they would sort of evaporate from society. So it would be sort of more concentrated between the sort of large proprietors and just the ordinary wage worker. So if there's any societal consequences in regards to economic crises or just more sort of general social occurrences, the reaction to those economic crises are exclusively controlled by the capitalist class. So I'll draw this out a little bit more, this sort of idea. So for example, if there's a crisis of overabundance with certain products, which means that they've produced far too many, there's way too many, so they can't actually sell it to the consumer. It is actually the capitalist class that decide how to sort of react to that crisis and how to solve that crisis. So, for example, they may find an innovation that allows them to produce the product more cheaply, thus raising their sales and ending the crisis over overabundance. Or they can use a number of other sort of methods. But the key thing to keep in mind is that it's the capitalist proprietor that has total control over that reaction. So presently, in capitalist society, workers have no internal democracy within the means of production or the type of objects which they create using their labour. So workers obviously can't make decisions about the workplace, and they can't actually change the products that they're producing. That's defined by someone else, and then they're just assigned that task to produce that item. Workers can exert a indirect impact on the means of production. They can demand higher wages, which alters the wage-profit ratio. If the wages of the workers are altered, this changes the rate which capitalists can expand their spheres of influence and raise their productive forces and invest into new markets, etc. So effectively, workers can demand a higher wage, which of course alters the wage to profit ratio. So if they are demanding higher wages, their profit ratio is being reduced. So this is the way that workers can sort of have a slight indirect impact on the means of production. So the emphasis that you need to take from this, the sort of essence of what I'm explaining here, is that it's the capitalists that have control over the means of production, not the workers. Workers are forced to secure a living by the sale of their labour power. You sell your labour power or you starve. You're free in the sense that you can pick a capitalist, but you're not truly free. You still have to secure your existence via the sale of labour power. So the question is, I did say that we were going to expand on these terms a little bit. So what is labour power? Labour power in its essence is the capacities possessed by a worker that they will exert to produce a use value. So it's their capacity to work and produce a use value in a product. workers sell their labour power. This labour power, the capitalist purchases for a set duration. It could be a week, a day, 4 hours, etc. The capitalist buys the worker for a set time and uses it up, and uses the labour power up by allowing them to sort of use their labour during those set times. So if you want to learn a little bit more about Marxian economics, you can really look at wage, labour and capital and value, price and profit. These are sort of the foundational texts of Marxian economics, or a good introductory text, I suppose you could say, on economics, Marxian economics. Use value is anything that is useful. So for example, a worker could produce a product like a keyboard that's sitting right in front of me, a keyboard that has a use value. It fulfills a human need. It's actually useful for something. But if a worker could assembled a product that had absolutely no use, then it would have no use value. So sort of moving on from looking at the sort of individual terms, need is essentially the master of workers. It's need which motivates them to maintain their existence via the sale of their labour power. You have to sell your labour power or you starve. So the ultimate goal of council communists is actually the abolishing of the wage system, which marks the end of capitalism itself. So workers previously have attempted this transformation of society through a socialisation of the means of production. The market economy would be replaced by a planned economy based on needs instead of profits. However, these planned economies are constructed within the boundaries of a bourgeois framework. The movement was bound to the conditions of bourgeois society or capitalist society. So the characteristics of these planned economies, or these planned sort of societies, will differ in correspondence to the material demands of the capitalist system. However, it will not gradually wither away in times and places in history where the conditions have not been met for the development of a proletarian class consciousness. Trade unions, working class parties and revolutionary parties function within the bourgeois framework. And because they function within the bourgeois framework, they can't actually be reliably anti-capitalistic. So these organizations are forced to be opportunistic to achieve power in society. Namely, they will have to exploit existing social processes to reach the restricted objectives. So let's look at a specific example of a labour organisation. So we'll look at trade unions, for example. So trade unions, they represent workers, and they'll review cases presented by workers. And when they review these cases presented by workers, so they're saying, the workers saying, the capitalists in my workplace didn't treat me correctly. What they'll do is they'll review these cases from different workers, and they'll probably exclusively select the ones that have the greatest chance of winning. So it seems like a fairly logical thing to do, but it just shows how these trade unions are forced to be opportunistic because they function with the bourgeois framework. They are still for profit. They still use money to operate, so they can't actually waste or expend that wealth on sort of a case that doesn't have that much evidence. They need to go for the ones which do have the most evidence, are the most likely to win, so that they actually save on those profits, so they've actually saved on that time, etc. So they've actually made the most money, and it protects their organization's reputation, etc. So moving on, the revolutionary parties. So this is another labour organisation planning to take power at an opportune moment. Do not make sense, as any revolutionary party will have to exploit existing capitalistic social processes within the bourgeois framework to gain any traction. So the organisations which have gained the most traction often have not significantly challenged the existing social relationships within capitalism. Organisations which have challenged the existing social order do not reach considerable sizes. A revolutionary party which upsets the existing state of things will become reformist. It may start with a revolutionary ideology. However, the organisation opposes the status quo. This is all labour organisations. They all oppose the status quo, but they also function within the status quo. They function within the bourgeois framework, the capitalist system. So the material conditions of capitalism actually water down the revolutionary nature of these organisations. They water them down. So at the end of the 1800s, the trade unions and communist parties actually lost their revolutionary edge. So, for example, we had Bernstein's revisionist trend in Marxism. So Bernstein actually said that wealth wasn't, that the patterns of wealth distribution weren't actually mimicking that of capitalism. He said that wealth was actually becoming more fairly distributed, and he was an anti-revolutionary. He said that we wouldn't need a revolutionary to actually reach socialist society. He said you could do it within the capitalist framework. That's my sort of understanding of him. So Lenin and Luxemburg fought to retain the revolutionary character of these organizations during this period. So Lenin's sort of style was to use a top-down vanguardist party, which involves the highly authoritative, and the sort of membership would have to submit their will to the party, and iron discipline, etc., to achieve the ends that they want to meet. Luxemburg instead emphasized sort of more bottom-up socialism, so more activation of the rank and file of the proletariat, and activation of the proletarian consciousness. So around the same time, there were actually various oppositional and reformist trends which were opposed to Marxism. So, for example, Syndicalism called for a general strike and rejected parliamentarism, instead advocating for activity in the trade unions. So the sudden popularity of these organisations, namely the IWW, was due to the sort of the bureaucratisation of political parties and trade unions, as well as their reformist collaborations with the bourgeoisie. So people were like, I don't want to go in parties anymore. I've had enough of these bureaucrats and these people who are not standing by the views they originally vouched to follow. And trade unions themselves were at this time were also exposed for their centralisation and anti-democratic and bureaucratic nature. So what the IWW specifically argued, so the industrial workers of the world, what they specifically argued is that they were constructing a new society within the old society. But again, they're still constructing something within the bourgeois framework. They're still constructing something within capitalist society. It's still susceptible to the material conditions of capitalism. It can still suffer from this bureaucratic deformations, etc. So what were the sort of major change in sort of politics as a whole, and what actually defines sort of counter communism really as a movement, is that during the 1905 Russian Revolution, the character of the proletarian consciousness was emphasized in the formation of spontaneously constructed Soviets. So this is in Russia, or workers' councils. So Soviets, just the word for workers' council. So these structures actually, these Soviets or workers' councils actually grew out the activation of the dormant masses. So it's actually from the activation of the proletarian consciousness. It's completely spontaneous. The Soviets developed out of independent action of the working class, namely strike actions without any direction from a centralised authority like a party or a union. So it's only the self-activation, the self-emancipation of the rank and file's own consciousness that was causing this. It was the emancipation of the working class themselves that was causing this to happen. So Trotsky actually has a very interesting quote regarding the Soviets. So he said the Soviets were the realization of an objective need for an organization which has authority without having tradition, and which can at once embrace hundreds of thousands of workers. An organization, moreover, which can unify all the revolutionary tendencies within the proletariat, which possess both initiative and self-control, which is the main thing, they can be called into existence within 24 hours. So parties organised within the proletariat, the workers' councils was the organisation of the proletariat. So sadly, the sort of 1905 revolution or sort of case study that we're looking at here was limited by its bourgeois character. Its aim was only to challenge the autocratic monarchy and to build a constituent assembly to usher in bourgeois society. So it wasn't actually on a sort of communist sort of basis. It was only for some restricted objectives. So the striking workers during this time who assembled these Soviets, workers' councils, had the same political orientation as the liberal middle class who were fighting against the Tsar. The Mensheviks at the time actually saw the necessity. They thought it was a prerequisite to have a bourgeois revolution as a template for setting up a socialist revolution. So a lot of the sort of, what you could say, Marxist socialists of that time within Russia, they thought that you had to. So it's sort of in traditional Marxist theory is that you need to be at a certain stage of capitalist development to actually get to socialism. And because Russia was a semi-feudal society, a lot of these socialist parties existing inside Russia at the time thought that you had to go through a period of capitalist development to then have socialism. So there was a lot of so obviously a lot of the political beliefs of the time were restricted objectives. They didn't believe that they could actually build socialism yet. So in 1905, the revolution was defeated, and the Soviets evaporated with that defeat. Later, though, that wasn't the last we saw of the spontaneous action of the masses. We saw in the February Revolution in 1917 that the Soviets came back stronger than ever with even greater numbers. And the German Revolution actually modelled the Soviet system that was seen in 1917, 1918, and there was also some upheaval and some sort of replication in England, France, Italy, and Hungary as well. So what the essence of Council Communism is, sort of bringing that all together, is that the Soviet system, for the first time, evidenced a new form of social organisation, so an exceptional form of human organisation that's not actually been seen before, that could permanently replace the existing social social order, an organisation which the masses could activate and lead themselves with their own defined objectives, so their sort of own restricted objectives seen in the 1905 revolution, or with their own revolutionary objectives. They can define the objectives themselves, and they can work against or together with existing organizations, and it's a representation of the purest and highest form of class consciousness. So the Council Communist movement invigorated sort of the left opposition. This case study, this witnessing the spontaneity of the masses. So the communist movement just sort of gained through these sort of case studies and through these evidences, actually gained an appreciation of the self-activation and spontaneity of the masses. In inspecting the Soviets, you can see a pure working class revolution is actually tangible. It's actually something that's real to us. It's not something distant and unobtainable. Unfortunately, the self-activation of the masses was not enough to reject the reformist methods of the vanguard parties in the Second International. So we know what happened after that.